Marcus Webb had delivered cargo to stranger places than Station Zenara, but few that made him feel quite so provincial. The docking bay alone was larger than some planetary settlements he'd visited, all sweeping architecture that curved in ways suggesting the designers had personal grievances against right angles. Ships from across the known galaxy occupied berths in organized chaos, sleek Centauri diplomatic vessels beside bulky Krogan freight haulers, experimental Earth-Mars hybrids near ancient Sarosian cruisers that predated human spaceflight by millennia. His own ship, the Reasonable Doubt, looked distinctly reasonable and entirely doubtful next to its neighbors. But it had gotten him here with his cargo intact, which was more than could be said for the previous hauler who tried the Zenara run and ended up scattered across 3 parsecs due to questionable navigation. Docking complete, his ship's AI announced with the vaguely judgmental tone he'd never quite managed to program out. All systems nominal. Your delivery window closes in 3 hours, which means you're early for the first time in your career. Document this moment, Marcus said, grabbing his manifest tablet and the secure case containing samples of Terran luxury goods, real silk, actual coffee, and a selection of chocolate that was worth more than his ship per kilogram. I'm turning over new leaves, or whatever the saying is. The station's interior was organized chaos, painted in species-neutral colors, and lit by bioluminescent panels that adjusted to the visual spectrums of whoever was looking at them. Marcus's translator earpiece buzzed constantly, catching fragments of 100 languages and rendering them into Terran standard with varying success. He'd learned to tune out the obvious errors. No, the Vorlaxian wasn't actually threatening to consume your grandmother's financial records. That was just the translator's interpretation of a standard business greeting. The commercial district sprawled across 3 levels, connected by lifts that compensated for different gravity preferences. Marcus kept to the standard G pathways, nodding to familiar species and giving wide berth to the ones he didn't recognize. Station Zenara's reputation as neutral ground was well earned, but neutral didn't mean safe. Just that violence came with paperwork. He made his delivery to a high-end textile merchant whose shop smelled like exotic spices and looked like the inside of a kaleidoscope. The merchant, a Centauri with crystalline growths that shifted color based on mood, examined the silk samples with reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Genuine earth silk, she breathed, her crystals glowing approval green. Your species may be relative newcomers to the galaxy, but you understand luxury. Payment transferred with bonus for early delivery and intact goods. Marcus checked his account, saw the transfer clear, and felt the pleasant warmth of a job completed successfully. Pleasure doing business. Same time next quarter. Absolutely, and Marcus. The merchant's crystals shifted to conspiratorial amber. The Twilight Market has new vendors. Might be worth browsing before you leave. He thanked her and headed for the market, curiosity and the warm glow of completed business making him incautious. The Twilight Market occupied a section of station designed to mimic atmospheric twilight, soft purple-blue lighting, temperature-controlled environments, and high-end vendors who catered to clientele with credits to spare and taste to match. Marcus wasn't shopping for anything specific, just browsing the way traders do when they're cataloging what's available for future reference. He passed stalls selling Vorlaxian gemstones that hummed with internal harmonics, Terran antiques that had somehow made it to the outer systems, and textiles from worlds he'd never visited woven in patterns that hurt to look at directly. That's when he saw them. The group moved through the market with synchronized precision that made everyone else look like they were stumbling through life by comparison. 6 women, tall and elegant, with silver-blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the market's artificial twilight. Their features were angular, almost severe, but balanced in ways that suggested evolutionary pressure had optimized for both function and aesthetics. They wore clothing that was clearly formal, intricate wrapping garments in deep colors that complemented their skin, but moved in it with the ease of people who could fight in formal wear if necessary. Sarosians. Marcus recognized them from trader databases and cultural briefings, though he'd never seen so many together. The Sarosians were matriarchal, organized in houses that functioned as military units, academic institutions, and political factions simultaneously. They produced the galaxy's most sought-after bodyguards. Their scholars were respected across a dozen fields, and their diplomats had a reputation for negotiating treaties that actually lasted. They were also, objectively, striking in ways that made Marcus's pattern recognition systems light up and his higher reasoning temporarily go offline. He'd been celebrating. One drink at the docking bay bar, nothing excessive, just enough to take the edge off the stress of making a deadline for once in his career. Enough that when his internal monologue said, "Are alien girls always this sexy?" he forgot that his translator was set to broadcast mode instead of receive only. The comment left his mouth in Terran, standard, and emerged from his translator in flawless Sarosian, at a volume that carried across the immediate market area. Every head in the group turned toward him simultaneously, a movement so perfectly synchronized it was clearly trained response. The market sound seemed to dim, or maybe Marcus's hearing had just prioritized the sound of his career possibly ending. 6 pairs of eyes focused on him with the kind of attention usually reserved for target acquisition. Marcus's survival instincts, honed by years of trading in questionable locations, began screaming that he'd made a catastrophic error and should initiate immediate retreat protocols. His mouth, unfortunately, had disconnected from those instincts and was currently trying to form an apology that came out as, "I that translator. The setting was wrong. I mean not wrong, you are, but I didn't mean to." The tallest of the women raised one hand, and Marcus's stammering stopped like she'd physically cut his vocal cords. She said something in Sarosian that his translator rendered as, "Interesting. The human has questions about aesthetic consistency across species. Perhaps we should provide data." The group began moving toward him, and Marcus discovered that 6 trained warriors approaching in coordinated formation, even without visible weapons, triggered every flight response evolution had programmed into human nervous systems. They formed a loose circle around him, not touching, not threatening, but definitely blocking casual exit routes. Up close, Marcus could see details his initial observation had missed. Intricate tattoos along their necks in patterns that probably meant something significant. The way they stood suggested combat training that had become unconscious habit, and their expressions ranged from amused to analytically curious with no fear whatsoever. The tall one who'd spoken first stepped closer, and Marcus got a better look at the tattoos marking her as either very important or very dangerous. Possibly both. "Your translator broadcast a question," she said, switching to Terran standard so flawless it made Marcus's attempts at other languages seem embarrassing. In Sarosian culture, such questions can be interpreted in multiple ways. We find ourselves curious which interpretation applies. Marcus's trading instincts finally kicked in, the part of his brain that had successfully negotiated with species who communicated through scent and haggled with merchants who considered lying an art form. He was in a negotiation now, just one where the stakes were his dignity and possibly his continued existence as a not dismembered person. "I said something stupid," he admitted, going for honesty because anything else would be obvious and probably make things worse. "I was thinking out loud, forgot my translator was broadcasting, and said something that was meant as internal observation but came out as public commentary." And the substance of the observation. The woman's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested she was actually curious about his answer, rather than just waiting for him to incriminate himself further. "That Sarosians are striking," Marcus said, deciding that admitting the truth was less dangerous than obvious deflection. "All of you." It was genuine appreciation expressed stupidly and publicly when it should have stayed private thought. One of the other women said something in Sarosian that made several others smile, and Marcus's translator offered. He admits fault without excessive groveling. Unexpected. The leader regarded him for a long moment, and Marcus became aware that half the market was watching this interaction, with the kind of interest usually reserved for entertainment. He'd somehow become a public spectacle, which was definitely not how he'd planned to spend his post-delivery celebration. "I am Velria of the Third House, Captain of the Twilight Guard," the woman said, and each title made Marcus's situation seem progressively more serious. "These are my companions, each holding rank and position within Sarosian diplomatic and military structures. Your comment, intentional or otherwise, has invoked certain cultural protocols." "What protocols?" Marcus asked, because apparently his mouth had decided that if it was already in trouble, it might as well commit to the chaos. Velria's smile was sharp enough to cut through hull plating. "The observation of intent. You've asked a question about us. We will now observe whether you possess the wit, respect, and genuine curiosity to deserve an answer." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, and mentally calculated how quickly he could reach his ship if he ran. The answer was not quickly enough, especially with 6 trained warriors between him and escape. "So what happens now?" he asked instead, going for the time-honored strategy of sounding more confident than he felt. "Now," Velria said, gesturing to her companions who shifted formation to become less circle of intimidation and more escort formation, "you accompany us for conversation. We will determine if you are fool, threat, or something more interesting. Your response will determine what follows." She turned and began walking toward one of the market's tea houses, and the other Sarosians moved with her in that synchronized way that suggested they could have this conversation with their eyes closed. Marcus stood frozen for approximately 3 seconds before his brain processed that refusing would be worse than accepting. He followed, falling into step beside Velria while very aware that he was surrounded by women who could probably disassemble him efficiently and were currently deciding if that would be necessary. "For what it's worth," he said as they walked, "this is the most interesting delivery aftermath I've ever experienced." "Your delivery?" Velria asked, one eyebrow raised in question. "I'm a cargo hauler, was here for a textile delivery. The browsing was supposed to be relaxing. And instead you accidentally invoked diplomatic protocol with a compliment your translator broadcast publicly." Velria's expression might have been amusement. "Your day has certainly become more complex." "Story of my life," Marcus muttered, and followed 6 elite alien women into a tea house while mentally composing messages to send from beyond the grave if this went badly. The market watched them go, and Marcus caught fragments of commentary his translator rendered as everything from brave human to foolish human, with no particular consensus on which was accurate. He suspected he was about to find out. The tea house was called the Harmonious Interval, which Marcus found either pretentious or accurately descriptive, depending on how generous he felt toward establishments that required him to remove his boots at the entrance. The interior was designed for cross-species comfort, seating that adjusted to different anatomies, tables at varying heights, and atmospheric controls that let each section maintain different temperature and humidity levels. Velria led them to a private alcove where the furniture adapted to Sarosian physiology, which meant Marcus ended up in a chair that felt like it was hugging him at uncomfortable angles until he shifted, and it recalibrated. The other women arranged themselves around the space with practiced efficiency, and Marcus found himself at what was clearly the focus of attention. A server approached, some species Marcus didn't recognize with too many arms and bioluminescent patterns that probably communicated mood. The Sarosians ordered in their native language, and Velria turned to Marcus. "Do you have preferences, or shall we order for you?" "I trust your judgment more than my knowledge of what won't poison me," Marcus admitted, which earned approving sounds from several of the women. Velria ordered something additional, and the server departed with movements that suggested either dance training or a completely different skeletal structure than Marcus was used to. So, Velria said, settling into her seat with the relaxed posture of someone completely confident in their ability to handle any situation. Let us begin the observation properly. You are Marcus Webb, cargo hauler, currently operating the independent vessel Reasonable Doubt. You've been trading in the outer systems for 6 years, with a reputation for completing deliveries intact if not always on time. Marcus blinked. You looked me up. In the 45 seconds between your comment and our approach, yes, we have certain technological advantages. She gestured to one of the other women, who produced a small holographic display showing Marcus's public trading record, ship registration, and what appeared to be his entire work history. You're licensed, bonded, and have only 3 formal complaints filed against you, all dismissed as cultural misunderstandings. Those were absolutely cultural misunderstandings, Marcus said. The Vorlaxian merchant didn't explain that no meant yes in negotiation contexts. The Centauri incident involved me not knowing their gesture for agreement looked exactly like the human gesture for insult. And the third one was just bad luck involving a translation error and someone's mother. One of the younger Sarosians, her tattoos suggested lower rank but recent achievement, laughed with genuine amusement. We reviewed the complaints. The third one was entertaining. You managed to simultaneously compliment and insult a matriarch through translator malfunction. Glad my suffering provides entertainment, Marcus said, but he was smiling despite the situation. The server returned with beverages that changed color in their cups and something that looked like bread but smelled like flowers. Velria demonstrated the proper way to consume the tea. Let it cycle through 3 color changes before drinking, and Marcus followed, discovering it tasted like mint mixed with something citrus and slightly electric. Now then, Velria said, sipping her own tea. The observation begins with simple questions. What brought you to trading? Marcus considered deflecting with a joke, but her expression suggested she'd know immediately and wouldn't appreciate it. Honestly, I wanted to see the galaxy and couldn't afford to do it as a tourist. Trading let me travel, meet other species, and occasionally make enough profit to keep my ship running. It's not romantic or ambitious, it's just what worked. And in your travels, you've learned multiple cultural protocols, negotiation styles, and survival strategies. Another Sarosian added. Her tattoos marked her as scholarly rank. Your record suggests adaptability and genuine curiosity about other species. Or just survival instinct, Marcus said. Hard to make a living if you keep insulting your clients. Yet you insulted us quite effectively, Velria observed, though her tone suggested more amusement than offense. That was accidental, and I apologized immediately. You admitted fault, Velria corrected. You did not actually apologize. Marcus replayed the conversation in his head and realized she was right. You're correct. I apologize for making a comment that was disrespectful, reductive, and broadcast publicly when it should have stayed private thought. That was inappropriate regardless of intent. The Sarosians exchanged glances, and Marcus caught fragments of their expressions, approval, interest, one who seemed skeptical. Velria leaned forward slightly. Better. Now answer the underlying question your comment raised. Do you actually find Sarosians attractive, or was it simply observation enhanced by alcohol and spoken carelessly? Marcus appreciated the directness, even if the question was designed to catch him regardless of answer. Admitting attraction could seem like he was just trying to flatter them. Denying it would make his original comment a lie. Yes, he said, going for honesty. I find you attractive, all of you. Sarosians generally, if I'm being completely honest, but I've traveled enough to know that aesthetic appeal without substance is boring. Beautiful people who are uninteresting exist across every species, and they're forgettable. You, all of you, are clearly more than appearance. The young Sarosian who'd laughed earlier spoke up, her standard carrying a musical accent. How do you know we're more than appearance? You've known us for 20 minutes. Your coordination suggests military training. Your tattoos indicate rank and achievement in systems I don't fully understand but can recognize as significant. Captain Velria looked up my entire history in 45 seconds, which means access to resources and technology beyond standard trader networks. And you're conducting what you've called an observation, which suggests cultural complexity and evaluation systems designed to determine worth beyond surface interaction. Marcus paused. Also, anyone who can make me this nervous while drinking tea is impressive in ways that have nothing to do with how they look. That earned actual laughter from several of them, and Velria's expression shifted from analytical to something warmer. You're doing better than the last 3 humans who invoked observation, she said. One groveled excessively, another became defensive and aggressive, the third tried to use wealth as substitute for personality. What happened to them? We dismissed them as unworthy of further time, Velria said simply. The observation is designed to separate those who see us as conquest, decoration, or genuine individuals worth knowing. You're treating this as conversation rather than trial. Is it not a trial? Marcus asked. It's both, but the best trials feel like conversation. Velria gestured to the others. My companions have questions. Answer honestly, and the responses ranged from "you're doomed" to "you're lucky," with no consensus on which was accurate. Marcus suspected he'd find out tomorrow at 900 station time, assuming his heart survived the anticipation. Marcus arrived at the designated coordinates at 8:55 station time, which he considered a professional achievement, given that he'd spent most of the night researching Sarosian culture and discovering that the databases contained significantly less useful information than he'd hoped. Most entries focused on their military prowess, diplomatic achievements, and academic contributions, with only vague mentions of cultural practices that emphasize honor, directness, and evaluation of worth through action rather than declaration. The coordinates led to a section of Zenara he'd never visited, an observation deck overlooking the station's central hub, where ships moved in carefully orchestrated traffic patterns that looked like chaos, but were actually tightly controlled precision. The deck was mostly empty at this hour, just a few early shift workers grabbing stimulants before their duties. The Sarosians were already there, of course. Velria stood at the main viewport, backlit by the glow of passing ships, and the others were arranged in what looked like casual conversation, but was probably tactical positioning. They all turned as Marcus approached, and he had the distinct impression of being evaluated before he'd even opened his mouth. "You're early," Velria observed. "We expected you to arrive exactly on time, based on your trading record." "I'm working on my punctuality," Marcus said, which earned a smile from the young Sarosian whose name he'd learned last night was Lysa. "Secondary observation begins with practical evaluation," Velria announced, gesturing for Marcus to join them at the viewport. "Yesterday was conversation. Today, we see if your adaptability extends beyond talking." "What exactly am I adapting to?" Marcus asked, suddenly wary. "Us," Lysa said cheerfully. "We're attending cultural events this week as part of diplomatic duties. You're coming along as, what was the term we decided on? Cultural liaison and observer," the scholarly Sarosian, whose name was Turin, supplied. "Officially, you'll be documenting human perspective on Sarosian diplomatic protocols. Unofficially, we're determining if you're capable of functioning in contexts where your usual trader skills won't help." Marcus processed this. "You want me to attend diplomatic events with you. We want to see if you can navigate formal situations, interact with species you don't know, and represent yourself adequately when surrounded by people more powerful and better connected than you are." Velria's expression was challenging. "Your trading gives you practical skills. We want to know if you have social and diplomatic capacity beyond commercial negotiation. And if I fail this evaluation, then we part ways having had interesting conversation, and you return to your trading route with good story." Velria moved closer, and Marcus noticed she was exactly his height when she wasn't wearing the formal boots from yesterday. But if you succeed, you gain contacts, opportunities, and potentially more interesting futures than hauling cargo on predictable routes. The offer was simultaneously generous and terrifying. Marcus knew enough about galactic politics to understand that access to Sarosian diplomatic circles could transform his business, or get him killed if he misstepped badly enough. "What's the first event?" he asked, because apparently his survival instincts had taken permanent vacation. "Tonight, formal reception for arriving delegations. You'll need appropriate attire, which we've taken liberty of arranging." Turin produced a data chip. "Send your measurements to this address. Clothing will be delivered to your ship by 1600. "You're very confident I'd agree to this," Marcus observed. "You're very predictable," Velria countered. Trader who spent 6 years building modest business suddenly offered access to networks that could expand his opportunities exponentially. "You'd be foolish to refuse, and you're not foolish, just occasionally stupid with your translator settings." Marcus laughed despite himself. "Fair assessment. I accept, with the understanding that I'm going to make mistakes and probably embarrass myself." "That's expected," Lysa said. "We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for capacity to recover from errors, learn quickly, and interact genuinely rather than politically." "Those I can probably manage," Marcus said, though his confidence was approximately 60% bravado and 40% hope. The rest of the morning was spent in what Velria called rapid cultural education, which involved the Sarosians explaining the key species attending the conference, their political positions, what topics were safe versus dangerous, and the 17 different ways Marcus could accidentally insult someone through body language alone. "Vorlaxians consider direct eye contact aggressive," Turin explained, pulling up holographic representations of different species. "Centauri expect physical touch during greeting, but only with specific crystal formations. The Kryn delegation communicates partially through scent, which your species can't detect, so watch their hand gestures instead." Marcus took notes on his tablet, his head spinning with information. "How do you keep track of all this?" "Practice and cultural education from childhood," Velria said. "Sarosian houses train for diplomatic roles from young age. We learn major species protocols before we learn advanced mathematics." "Your education system sounds intense." "It produces competent adults," Velria said with the certainty of someone who'd never questioned the system. "Your human approach of letting children develop naturally produces creativity, but also ignorance of basic interspecies interaction." "Fair criticism," Marcus admitted. "Earth is still figuring out its place in galactic community. We're good at innovation, terrible at protocol." "Which is why you need liaisons," Lysa added, "and why tonight will be interesting. You'll be surrounded by species who have been navigating these waters for centuries, and you're the relative newcomer trying not to drown." "Encouraging imagery," Marcus muttered. The education session continued through lunch, which involved more color-changing tea and food that Marcus was assured was human-safe. And by mid-afternoon, Marcus's brain felt like it had been stuffed with more cultural information than it could possibly retain. "Last piece of advice," Velria said as they prepared to separate for the afternoon. "Tonight, you'll be introduced as our cultural liaison. Some will assume that means you're important. Others will assume you're decoration. Show them you're neither, just competent human trying to learn. And if I genuinely don't know how to handle a situation, ask us," Turin said simply. "Admitting ignorance is better than faking knowledge. We've seen too many diplomats destroy negotiations because they were too proud to admit they didn't understand." Marcus returned to his ship with his head full of protocol, and his inbox full of messages from contacts wanting to know why he was being seen with Sarosian Twilight Guard. Apparently, word traveled fast on Zenara, and trader networks were excellent at gossip. The clothing arrived exactly at 1600, formal where that was clearly designed for humans but with Sarosian aesthetic influences. Deep blue fabric that shifted slightly in light, cut in ways that suggested both professionalism and the capacity for movement, and accessories that Marcus assumed meant something in Sarosian visual language, but looked elegant to human eyes. He tried it on, made minor adjustments, and stood in front of his ship's small mirror wondering how he'd gone from simple cargo delivery to attending diplomatic reception in less than 48 hours. His comm chimed. Velria's voice, audio only. Transport will collect you at 18:30. Don't be late. Wouldn't dream of it, Marcus replied, and spent the remaining time reviewing his notes and trying not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The transport turned out to be an official Sarosian shuttle, which meant Marcus arrived at the reception venue in style that was way above his usual clearance level. The venue itself was stunning, a section of station designed to mimic natural environment from some world Marcus didn't recognize, with bioluminescent plants and atmospheric controls that created gentle breezes carrying floral scents. The Sarosians were waiting at the entrance, and Marcus barely recognized them. Yesterday's practical clothing had been replaced with formal diplomatic attire, intricate wrapping garments that displayed their house colors and rank insignia, jewelry that probably cost more than his ship, and an overall presentation that screamed important people who could end you politically. Velria approached, and Marcus noticed her tattoos had been enhanced with some kind of luminescent paint that made them glow softly against her silver-blue skin. "You clean up adequately," she observed, looking him over with an appraising eye. "You all look like you're about to negotiate treaties that will reshape the galaxy," Marcus replied. "We might be," Turin said, joining them. "That's partially why you're here, fresh perspective on how these events function." They entered together, and Marcus was immediately overwhelmed by the sheer density of power in the room. He recognized species from databases, saw individuals whose faces he'd seen in galactic news feeds, and felt like the least qualified person in a room full of people who shaped interstellar policy. Velria stayed close, her presence both comforting and reminder that he was here under her authority. "Breathe," she murmured. "You've negotiated with merchants who'd cheat you for profit. These people are just more polished about it." "Comforting," Marcus muttered, but he did breathe and felt marginally less like he was about to pass out. The evening proceeded in waves of introduction, careful conversation, and Marcus trying desperately to remember which species required eye contact and which found it offensive. He made mistakes, called a centauri by the wrong honorific, stood too close to a Vorlaxian who appreciated distance, but recovered quickly and apologized appropriately. The Sarosians watched everything, occasionally intervening when he was clearly drowning, but mostly letting him navigate on his own. Marcus caught Velria's eye once during conversation with a Kryn merchant, and her slight nod suggested he was doing adequately. The real test came when a human delegation arrived, Earth-Mars diplomatic corps, all polished professionalism and political ambition. Their leader, a woman whose credentials included negotiating the Titan Accords, approached with the kind of smile that suggested she collected useful contacts like some people collected stamps. "Marcus Webb," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard you're serving as cultural liaison for the Sarosian delegation. That's quite the promotion from cargo hauling." Marcus shook her hand, recognizing the test immediately. She was questioning his qualifications, suggesting he was out of his depth, all while maintaining diplomatic politeness. "It's educational," he replied. "Turns out accidentally invoking cultural protocols can lead to interesting opportunities." Accidentally, her smile sharpened. "The Sarosians don't typically engage with accidents. You must have done something right. Or something interesting enough to warrant investigation," Marcus said. "I'm still determining which." She laughed, genuine amusement breaking through political facade. "Honest answer, rare in these circles. Perhaps you're exactly what they need, someone who hasn't learned to substitute performance for authenticity. The conversation continued, and Marcus realized she was actually helpful, pointing out key players and offering context his morning education hadn't covered. By the time she moved on to other conversations, Marcus felt like he'd passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. Velria appeared at his elbow. "You handled that well." She's known for dismantling people who pretend competence they don't have. "I just told the truth," Marcus said. "Exactly." Velria's expression was approving. "Come, there are people you should meet." The rest of the evening was a blur of introductions, careful conversations, and Marcus slowly realizing that he was being presented not as decoration, but as actual liaison. The Sarosians introduced him as colleague, asked his opinions on human perspectives, and generally treated him like his input mattered. It was simultaneously flattering and terrifying. By the time the reception wound down, Marcus's brain was exhausted from maintaining diplomatic awareness for 4 straight hours. The Sarosians gathered near the exit, and Lysa looked energized while Turin looked satisfied. "Well," Velria asked Marcus as they waited for transport, "verdict on your first diplomatic event?" "I have new respect for anyone who does this regularly," Marcus admitted. "That was more exhausting than negotiating cargo rates with merchants who actively want to cheat me. But you survived, made useful contacts, and didn't cause any incidents." Velria counted off on her fingers. "That's better than our last human liaison's first event." "What happened at their first event?" "They insulted a Vorlaxian ambassador's mother through translator error, and nearly started a diplomatic incident that required 3 days of apologies to resolve." "Setting the bar low works in my favor," Marcus said, which earned laughter from the group. The transport arrived, and as they headed back toward the docking section, Velria turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Tomorrow, we have cultural briefing sessions. You're invited to attend, observe, and provide human perspective when relevant." "Is this still the observation, or have I graduated to something else?" "You've progressed from possibly interesting to actually useful," Velria said. "Whether that leads to formal association or just memorable week remains to be determined." Marcus nodded, too tired to fully process the implications. "I'll be there. What time?" 900. "Are you capable of being early twice in a row?" "I'm working on it," Marcus said, and meant it. The shuttle dropped him at his ship, and Marcus collapsed into his quarters feeling like he just completed a marathon while juggling flaming objects. His comm showed messages from 24 trader contacts wanting details, 3 commercial opportunities that had mysteriously appeared after word spread about his Sarosian connections, and 1 message from Velria. He opened it. "You did well tonight. Sleep adequately. Tomorrow will be more challenging. V." Marcus sent back a simple acknowledgement and fell into his bunk wondering what "more challenging" meant when the baseline was already diplomatic reception, full of people who could reshape galactic politics with casual conversations. He dreamed of color-changing tea, cultural protocols he couldn't quite remember, and Velria's approving expression when he'd admitted ignorance instead of faking knowledge. Whatever he'd stumbled into with his stupid comment, it was becoming significantly more interesting than cargo hauling, and possibly more dangerous, but Marcus was increasingly okay with that. The next morning brought what Velria had called cultural briefing sessions, which Marcus discovered meant sitting in on actual diplomatic strategy meetings, where the Sarosians planned their approach to the week's negotiations. He'd expected to observe from the back of the room. Instead, he was seated at the table with a data pad and a request to provide human perspective when relevant. The meeting room was secured with technology Marcus didn't recognize, and the participants included not just Velria's group, but several other Sarosian delegations, each representing different houses with their own political priorities. The discussions were complex, multi-layered, and occasionally heated in ways that reminded Marcus that Sarosians valued directness to the point of what humans would consider bluntness. The human perspective, one of the other delegation leaders said, turning to Marcus mid-debate about trade route agreements, would be what, exactly? Your species has been in galactic community for barely a generation. It wasn't hostile, just direct in that Sarosian way. Marcus took a breath and answered honestly. We're new, yes, which means we don't have entrenched positions or centuries of diplomatic precedent. Sometimes fresh perspective notices things long-term players miss because they're too invested in existing frameworks. Such as, the leader leaned forward, genuinely curious. Such as the fact that the trade route proposal you're debating assumes all species value efficiency over cultural significance. But humans would absolutely take a longer route if it meant avoiding territory we considered sacred, even if it cost more. Marcus pulled up the route map on his pad. You're treating this as pure logistics, but for some species, where ships travel matters as much as speed and cost. The room went quiet, and Marcus worried he'd overstepped. Then Turin spoke up, her scholarly tone carrying approval. He's correct. We were analyzing purely economic factors and ignoring cultural elements. The Centauri delegation has been resistant. This might be why. The discussion shifted, incorporating Marcus's observation, and he watched the Sarosians adapt their strategy in real time based on input from a human cargo hauler who'd been attending diplomatic events for less than 48 hours. Velria caught his eye across the table and smiled, subtle but genuine. The pattern continued through the week. Marcus attended briefings, observed negotiations, and occasionally provided perspective that the Sarosians found useful specifically because he wasn't trained in their diplomatic traditions. His outsider status became an asset rather than liability. Evenings involved more receptions, cultural events, and Marcus slowly building a network of contacts that included species he'd only read about and individuals whose decisions affected billions of lives. He made mistakes, confused a Kryn family name with their business designation, stood in the wrong position during a formal greeting that required specific spatial arrangement, but recovered quickly and learned from each error. The Sarosians watched throughout, their evaluation continuous but increasingly relaxed. Lysa started treating him like colleague rather than test subject. Turin asked his opinion on academic papers she was reviewing, and Velria's interactions shifted from formally evaluative to something that felt like actual friendship, developing beneath the diplomatic professionalism. On the fourth evening, after another successful reception, Marcus found himself alone with Velria on an observation deck overlooking the station's central hub. The others had returned to their quarters, but Velria had suggested they debrief, which apparently meant standing in comfortable silence watching ships navigate traffic patterns. "You've done well this week," Velria said eventually. "Better than we anticipated when you made your spectacularly stupid comment in the Twilight Market." "High praise," Marcus said, smiling. "I've gone from spectacularly stupid to better than anticipated. In Sarosian evaluation, that's significant progression." She turned to face him and her expression was serious. "The observation period is concluding. We need to discuss what comes after." Marcus's heart did something complicated. "What are the options?" "We part ways having had educational week. You return to trading with expanded network and good stories. We continue our diplomatic work." Velria paused. "Or we formalize the liaison arrangement. You become official cultural consultant for the third house, which means regular work, better pay than cargo hauling, and insertion into diplomatic circles that could be beneficial or dangerous, depending on how you navigate them." "That's quite an offer," Marcus said carefully. "It's also quite a commitment. The third house doesn't make casual associations. If we bring you on formally, you represent us. Your actions reflect on our house. Your mistakes become our mistakes, and your success becomes our success." "And personally?" Marcus asked, because he'd learned that directness was valued. "Is this purely professional evaluation, Or has the observation included determining other compatibility? Velria's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise, or possibly approval at his directness. Sarosian women don't do casual interest. If we decide someone is worth our time, we pursue with focus we bring to everything else. You asked at the beginning if alien girls were always sexy. The answer is, Sarosian women are always focused, always intense, and always direct about what we want. And what do you want? Marcus asked, his pulse increasing. Currently, to see if the human who accidentally invoked our protocols, survived our observation, and proved himself capable in diplomatic contexts is as interesting personally as he is professionally. She moved closer, and Marcus was reminded that she was a trained warrior who could probably disassemble him efficiently, but was choosing to be vulnerable instead. Fair warning. Sarosian courtship is direct, intense, and involves family approval processes that make your diplomatic events look simple. Marcus laughed despite his nervousness. I accidentally courted you with a stupid comment. I think I can handle intentional courtship. Confidence, Velria observed. That's either attractive or concerning, possibly both. Story of this week, Marcus said. They stood in comfortable silence, watching ships navigate the hub, and Marcus processed that he'd gone from simple cargo delivery to potential formal liaison position and courtship with a Sarosian captain who'd initially terrified him. I accept, he said eventually, the formal liaison position and whatever else develops from there, with the understanding that I'm going to continue making mistakes and needing guidance. Acceptable terms, Velria agreed. Though you should know that Lysa has decided you're adorably incompetent in endearing ways. Turin thinks you have surprising capacity for strategic thinking. And the rest of the delegation has placed bets on how long before you either cause diplomatic incident or become invaluable asset. What are the odds? Currently equal, Velria admitted. I have money on invaluable asset, but I'm potentially biased. By what? By finding that humans who admit mistakes, adapt quickly, and treat diplomatic functions like extended negotiation are exactly the kind of allies the Third House needs. She paused, and personally finding that humans who accidentally court Sarosian warriors and then intentionally pursue them are more interesting than expected. Marcus felt his face heat, which was embarrassing but apparently visible enough that Velria smiled. You blush, that's endearing. You're terrifying, Marcus countered. Yes, but you're here anyway, which suggests either courage or poor survival instincts. Definitely poor survival instincts, Marcus said. My traitor friends think I'm insane for accepting this. Your traitor friends lack vision, Velria said. Come, we should inform the others of your decision, and then there are approximately 17 forms required for formal Third House association that need your documentation. 17 forms. Sarosian bureaucracy is extensive. You'll learn to navigate it. She started toward the exit, then looked back. And Marcus, welcome to significantly more complicated future than cargo hauling. Try not to cause diplomatic incidents in your first month. I make no promises, Marcus said, following her while mentally composing messages to his trader contacts explaining that he was now formally associated with Sarosian Third House and would not be returning to regular cargo routes. The responses would probably range from congratulations to you're insane, with heavy emphasis on the latter. But watching Velria walk ahead of him, her confident stride and the subtle smile she wasn't quite hiding, Marcus decided that accidentally invoking cultural protocols with stupid comments sometimes led to the most interesting places. Assuming he survived the family approval processes, diplomatic learning curve, and whatever other challenges came with courting a warrior diplomat who decided he was worth her focused attention. His translator was permanently set to think before speaking mode. His calendar was full of diplomatic events he was still learning to navigate, and his future had shifted from predictable trading routes to completely uncertain diplomatic waters. but looking at Velria holding the door for him and gesturing him through, with that mix of formality and warmth he was learning to recognize, Marcus thought that uncertainty might be exactly what he'd been missing. The galaxy was significantly more interesting when you stopped playing it safe and started saying yes to opportunities that began with catastrophically stupid comments and ended with warrior diplomats deciding you were worth keeping around. Even if it meant 17 forms, family approval processes, and the constant awareness that he was one mistake away from either diplomatic incident or invaluable asset status. Marcus walked through the door into his significantly more complicated future and decided he was surprisingly okay with all